Hello, and thank you for tuning in to watch this presentation. It's about a topic we should all care deeply about. That is the conservation of our nation's natural heritage, which is the very foundation of our well-being as individuals, as communities, and as a country. My name is Healy Hamilton, and I'm the Chief Scientist at NatureServe. Before we start, I'd like to thank my amazing team of co-authors, as well as the entire NatureServe network of natural heritage programs in every state. Without their decades of biodiversity data and expertise, the work I'm about to share would not be possible. Here, our focus will be on the development and application of spatial data for imperiled species to support conservation actions. Here's an example from an important analysis published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2015 by the lab of our friend and colleague, Dr. Stuart Pym at Duke University. By analyzing information on the geographic ranges of thousands of species, such as the map on the far left for the greater roadrunner, they produced the map on the right showing where our conservation priorities should be focused in the lower 48 states. Another example where species distribution information contributes to conservation priorities is this landscape scale effort for the South Atlantic region, developed by the many partners of the former Landscape Conservation Cooperative. Distribution data for imperiled species was one of the factors that was included in their conservation blueprint for the region. In the northeastern US, imperiled species, shown in the orange circle in the upper left list of data inputs, are a central factor in the development of a landscape conservation design. These are just a couple examples showing how national and regional conservation prioritization efforts require spatial information on where imperiled species are found as a central component in their development. These landscape conservation designs help guide smart conservation investments and reduce conflict with other land uses. But here's the issue though. Traditionally, we've taken one of two approaches for species spatial data inputs. On the left, we've mapped confirmed occurrences of an imperiled species. Here it's the frosted flatwood salamander, documented from fieldwork by qualified biologists, such as those from the Natural Heritage Network. Although these are the highest confidence records of where this species occurs, we know they're an underrepresentation. We rarely have the opportunity or the resources to conduct comprehensive field surveys. A more common approach is depicted on the right. We use coarse range maps or even county boundaries in jurisdictions where the species is known or suspected to occur. But we definitely know this over-predicts the distributions of our target species. Habitat is almost never suitable throughout the entire area represented by these broad range maps. And yet it is one of these two approaches that are the most widely used data inputs for spatial conservation analyses. If we're going to be effective and efficient about identifying conservation investments, and where to avoid conflict with infrastructure development, agriculture, or other land uses, we need to dramatically improve our spatial data for species at risk. Habitat suitability modeling is an approach that can help us achieve this objective. Also called species distribution modeling, this is an academically mature technique that, combined with advances in computation and the availability of spatial environmental data, it's more than ready to be deployed to improve the precision of our conservation data. Habitat suitability models take those confirmed occurrence records of a given species, those green dots in the left panel, combine them with environmental data layers that are called predictor variables, and then use machine learning algorithms to create a model of the conditions that define that species in space. The output is a probability of suitable habitat, where in this example, the brighter yellow colors indicate higher probability that habitat is suitable in those locations for that species. These maps can be thresholded using a variety of statistical approaches. So using well-documented methods that are transparent and repeatable, we can develop a spatially explicit hypothesis of a given species distribution. So NatureServe has been taking habitat suitability modeling to scale for the imperiled species of our nation. In collaboration with Esri, the Nature Conservancy, and Microsoft's AI for Earth program, we've developed and vetted habitat suitability models for 2,216 taxonomically diverse species at risk in the conterminous US. You may have heard already of the Map of Biodiversity Importance, or MoBi project, prior to today. Our early results were featured in plenary in the July 2019 user conference. And in February, we released a suite of final map products on Esri's Living Atlas during our plenary keynote at the Fed GIS conference in DC. This talk is going to focus on the analyses of MoBi data that can help prevent these already imperiled species from further decline. So here's just a few examples among the 15 MoBi maps that were released on Esri's Living Atlas in February of this year. This is a summary of species richness generated by stacking up the expert vetted models and summing by the number of imperiled species found there. This is a map where range size for each species has been accounted for so that narrow range endemics, which have fewer conservation opportunities, are weighted more heavily than wide-ranging species where there are more opportunities to protect them in some part of their range. Finally, this is a map for all species where we consider not only range size, but also the degree of protection that currently is in place across their range. So we define protected here using GAP status 1 and 2 from the current version of the US Protected Areas database. So this protection-weighted range size rarity map lights up places where imperiled species with smaller ranges are unprotected. So these three analyses for all at-risk species we modeled, as well as subsetted into 4 taxonomic groups of vertebrates, aquatic invertebrates, plants, and pollinators, are all available on Esri's Living Atlas of the World. Just search for MoBi, M-O-B-I. One thing we really want to emphasize is that MoBi is not just a set of map products. It's also a process that is set up and in place for generating revisions of these first generation models and new models for additional priority species. We've built MoBi to not be like a once and done static product, but to live on as a dynamic and transparent and efficient process where new data can feed ongoing revisions and the data for decision making are always improving. But even this first generation offers an enormous refinement from previous maps. This next map starts off with the historically most widely requested of all NatureServe's synthetic data products, the rarity weighted richness map derived from confirmed occurrences of imperiled species. But we know there are gaps in these data, and models can help fill those gaps, providing a more complete and detailed view of conservation opportunities. Our MoBi manuscript is nearing submission for scientific peer review and publication. We've now analyzed the MoBi data to address questions that are relevant to conservation, some of which can be asked for the first time because of the unprecedented taxonomic and spatial resolution of MoBi products. Each species in these analyses has a value here for range size rarity. That is, how large a range it occupies according to the vetted model outputs, which is then weighted by the percent of that range that is, that's weighted by the extent of that range, narrow or broader. So we're asking ourselves how we can calculate the degree of protectiveness. We then weight those further by the percent of that range that is covered by GAP 1 and 2 protected areas. So once these values are summed, each pixel has a relative value of protectedness across all species. In our efforts, we're defining a unit called Areas of Unprotected Biodiversity Importance, or ABIs. These are all pixels above a certain threshold of protection-weighted range size rarity summed across all species. These are areas, these yellow ones on the map, highlighting where narrow range unprotected species occur in the landscape. We can then analyze ABIs, right, these areas of unprotected biodiversity, by state and by taxonomic group. We were not surprised in this analysis to then see California topping the list, but as one example, we were quite surprised to see that Texas was the only state that ranks in the top 10 states for all 4 taxonomic subsets of vertebrates, freshwater invertebrates, plants, and pollinators. Texas has so much private land that it's relatively poorly sampled, so these results are a bit of a revelation of the conservation need and opportunity there. Here we assess the influence of taxonomic diversity on identifying conservation priorities. For decades, it's been proposed that by conserving the better known vertebrates, like birds and mammals and amphibians, we'd also conserve habitat for the lesser known species. Here we show the areas of unprotected biodiversity importance defined by birds, mammals, and amphibians in red, and compare to those defined by using the other taxonomic subsets. So the turquoise represents the ABIs for each taxonomic group that are not included if you just look at birds, mammals, and amphibians. 98% of the plant and pollinator and freshwater invertebrate areas are not included when you look at the bird, mammal, and amphibian areas of unprotected biodiversity importance. If you designate ABIs just with data from birds, mammals, and amphibians, you'd entirely leave out almost 1,200 plants. So think about how many state wildlife action plans don't even consider plants, and yet many of them provide conservation blueprints for their states. So this analysis shows the importance of embracing taxonomic diversity in our conservation priorities. Here's another question we can ask with MoBi data. We can compare previous efforts that mostly rely on range maps to results using habitat suitability models for species where we have both data types. In this map, we're comparing the highest 5% of values for protection weighted range size rarity summed across the 3 imperiled vertebrates, birds, mammals, and amphibians, because we have both data types, the range maps and the models for those species groups. Using range maps, it identifies 850 unique polygons with an average size of well over 450 square kilometers, while the higher resolution habitat models identify over 13,000 much smaller polygons that are on average about 30 kilometers each. Although the Southern Appalachians and the Florida Panhandle and California's Central Valley, they're all shown as important using either type of distribution data, the habitat models point to many other areas that are important. So again, thinking about these results from the perspective of states that are working to conserve imperiled vertebrates within their jurisdiction, the habitat models identify important areas in 46 of the 48 states, while the range maps do so in only 24 states. We can also ask, who's most responsible for taking action to prevent extinction of these imperiled species? Again, using the US Protected Areas database, this table shows management responsibility for the numbers of species where over half of their modeled habitat extent is on land managed by these different categories of landowners. For our major federal land management agencies, by far, the US Forest Service has the most responsibility for imperiled species. I thought it was going to be BLM, but this analysis clearly demonstrates that the Forest Service has huge responsibility for managing our nation's most threatened biodiversity, and not just for plants, but also for threatened vertebrates. This analysis also calls out the important role of private lands, which here are broadly defined as lands with no ownership category in the Protected Areas database. Note especially that for freshwater invertebrates, which are critical to maintaining healthy river ecosystems and all the benefits they provide to fishermen, to foresters and farmers, almost all the conservation need falls on private lands. We've created a map poster that dives deeper into opportunities for conservation on federal multiple use lands. The sideboard here highlights Lincoln National Forest in New Mexico, where multiple imperiled species have suitable habitat within a single area of a single ranger district on lands right now designated for multiple use. If field surveys confirm the presence of those species, then conservation is justified as one of those uses. This map we've submitted to Esri's map call for this user conference. So hopefully, if it is accepted, it will be in the virtual map gallery. And you can also see it in NatureServe's virtual exhibition booth. So thank you again for your interest in the efforts of NatureServe, the Natural Heritage Program Network, and our funders and collaborators at Esri, TNC, and Microsoft. We hope you've enjoyed learning about both the products and process that we have developed that provide actionable knowledge for sustaining our nation's biodiversity. You can find out more about MoBi on natureserve.org at the Mapping Critical Areas icon. The link to our Project Hub site is above, that also contains several story maps, as well as my own contact information via email. We hope that you are inspired to help conserve areas of unprotected biodiversity importance that are near your own backyards. Thank you.